Hello and welcome to a special edition of the In the Money Players podcast. It's really like the season finale plus of Horse Players Happy Hour. That's how I look at this show. We made the joke last week that if the real finale where we give away all the seats and whatnot is the Super Bowl, this is the Pro Bowl. But Breeders' Cup Eve, and nowhere I'd rather be to do one of the last shows. There's actually another one coming up, if you can believe it. The Pro Player Roundtable will be happening after this. I've got a busy night ahead of me, but I can't wait to talk about Breeders' Cup now that we've actually had a chance to look at all these races with a man I've been chatting about with it all year long. And I'm referring, of course, to a man you'll see on NBC. You know him from his own eponymous podcast. He is TV's Matt Bernier. Matt, what's up?
What do you think about calling this the encore for Horse Players Happy
I like
Hour?
that.
You know,
Horse
we had the whole show.
Yeah,
we come back for one last set and we talk about the big races and any questions that the listeners have.
No, I think that's perfect. And yeah, we did. This is also a little thank you to our In the Money Plus subscribers. They're the ones who provide the questions for this show. In the unlikely event we get to all of them and there's time left, you can maybe pop a question in the comments. But we're giving priority to the people who support us all year long, trying to do something special for them. Matt, it looks like you have some interesting fuel there in the spirit of Horse Player Happy Hours past. What do you got? What do you got rocking?
I've forgotten. I don't know why, but every Breeders' Cup year or week rolls around every year, and just the amount of caffeine that you need. So we have water, we have a beer, and we have a cup of coffee at 8 o'clock at night. knowing that I'm going to be going to bed probably. I don't know. I'd like to be asleep by 10. I think that's ambitious, but that's my goal for this evening.
I'm thinking 10:30 maybe for me, but sometimes Paul and Sean get going on the Pro Player Roundtable show, and I'm not going to stop them. But I am going to tell them going in, look, I mean, I've had 16 people tell me today, I really want to hear you and Matt. I really want to hear Paul and Sean. You know, if they're going to do 2 more hours of podcast tomorrow, these shows should each be an hour. And that's what we're going for in this spot. We've had a couple of scratches come in for the Breeders' Cup. Are you up on these, Matt? Do you know what's going on in terms of breaking news?
The only changes that I know as of this afternoon were hot peppers out of the Filly and Mare Sprint, and I believe informative out of the Dirt Mile. Beyond that, I haven't heard anything. Did something else happen?
No, that sounds like the two. The hot peppers one in particular, before we get to the plus subscribers questions, does that affect the pace at all in this spot, do you think?
Yeah, I think it does. I don't, does it affect the outcome of the race? I don't know that her presence was sort of the make or break piece, but she was certainly going to be a pace factor in a race that it seemed like it was going to be pretty lively up front. So maybe you want to give a little more credit or upgrade those forward runners a little more because there's one less horse that they have to deal with. But I still think there's enough gas in that race, especially with Slammed and Edgeway drawn to the inside. I can't help but think they both have to go. Echo Zulu outside is going to go. So I still think it's going to be a lively pace. Me personally, it's not changing my approach to the race, but there is one less pace factor to deal with.
In theory, it maybe tilts it, not even a point in the odds, but like a percentage point on a 100-point scale, a point to Goodnight Olive over obligatory for me. But like, it's so small in that regard as to be, not particularly significant because, as you point out, there's so much speed. As we've noted many times, when you've got need to run horses on the inside and the outside in the same race, it seems to have, a little bit of an algorithmic effect to it just moves things along in terms of the pace that much quicker. All right, let's get to some of our handicapping questions, and we're going to start with Curtis W., who asks us, which figures do you rely on most, and how do you incorporate or decipher or use differences between two sets of figures? For example, Thorograph versus Bayer or Timeform US. Curtis trying to get a better example of trying to figure out a way to combine multiple products on these big days. I think it's a good question. I always look at multiple sets of figures. I'll throw this one to you, Matt, first before I button it up.
No, but I mean, you were kind of going the path that I've gone down before, and we've brought it up during happy hours in the past. The idea of, I think it's, if at all possible, get your hands on at least two sets of figures, if not three. And a week like this is kind of one of those that I'm not afraid to take as many figs as possible and just compare and contrast, because if they're all in lockstep, suggesting a certain race is fast, I have no reason to doubt it or no reason to question. If there's a discrepancy with one or two, or it's split 50-50, or, however you want to go about it, that's when I think you need to go in and do a little bit of a deeper dive. As far as which ones do I trust more, I don't think there's one set of figs that I trust more than the other. I think any commercial figure you can get these days is fantastic, frankly. And we know people that are involved with certain figures. And I'm not just sort of avoiding saying one over the other because we know people and we're friendly with people, but I genuinely think all the figs available commercially are fantastic. I think if you really wanted to try to find an edge, to be fair, it could also be your demise, is to try to do it on your own or find someone who does figs sort of privately that maybe they've got their own twist on things. But again, that could be a bit of a slippery slope unless it's someone that knows what they're talking about and has experience doing it. I wouldn't try to reinvent the wheel come Breeders' Cup week, though.
I think Matt nailed it. I mean, to me, what's really interesting is just to see when Bayer and Timeform US are the same. And I think that's a figure you can have more confidence in. And when Bayer and Timeform US are different, I try to flag that up, and you can make a note, whether it's in Timeform US or DRF. Hey, this is a figure we should look at. And then when three horses come back and make one or the other look right, I'm going to want that in my notes too. The thing about Thorograph specifically, and Rob Dove, one of the top 10 pro punters in the UK today, and I had a long conversation about this. It's very hard. There's math out there for how to convert it to the Bayer scale, but when you do the math and look, I don't know. There's something about it that the converted Thorographs don't line up. And I'm not saying I don't like the Thorographs. I do like them, but I like the Thorographs more in ordinal terms. In other words, who's the fastest horse in the race, the second fastest horse, the third fastest horse, etc., than trying to make it an apple to apple thing like you can with the Bayers and the Timeform US numbers, which I think works really well trying to put those on the same scale. I don't know why that is, honestly. And somebody and some part of me likes to make a bet when possible on a Thorograph number but because they're less available, except, and here's my issue with Thorograph, is that I think in the modern racetrack maintenance game, they're giving too much extra credit to horses who were wide on dead rail days. You look at these Thorographs for the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, they don't pass muster to me, honestly. They have lots of horses as fast as Cave Rock, and every other figure I'm seeing has Cave Rock massively faster than everybody else. And I dive into it. And a wonderful thing about Thorograph is they show their work. You can see when they have a horse three wide, and they're upgrading that horse. But to me, three wide on a dead rail day, like, what, you're making a massive mistake upgrading that horse. Anyway, a very long way of trying to answer this question. It's tricky. It's not an easy thing to do, but I do like Thorograph when they have a horse, a horse that they're not upgrading for ground loss on a dead rail day that's faster. That information sometimes isn't as factored into the price. It's also useful for the Breeders' Cup because they have numbers on the apples to apples scale for European invaders. Anyway, Matt, anything to button this up before we move on to the next question?
No, you brought up the only thing that I would throw out as sort of cause for pause if you are using some sort of sheets, whether it's the rags or, obviously Thorograph. And Thorograph is one of the three that I usually use, or four, I should say, for an event like the Breeders' Cup. Just that ground loss piece, being wide's not always a bad thing, but purely based on those numbers, that could give you a little bit of a false sense of how strong, or maybe, basically saying that certain races are going to be upgraded when maybe they shouldn't be in the grand scheme of things. So, again, do with that what you will. You need to be the one to go through and find your wheelhouse. I frankly like Thorograph more from sort of the pattern angle, where they go through and assess how well a trainer does with this sort of progression into this race, as opposed to, think of a buyer number or a Timeform US number, which is more or less just a figure of how fast the horse ran. I like the pattern idea or the pattern trend using Thorograph in a spot like this.
Sometimes too, just the way the sheets presented. If you're like a visual learner, you just see stuff on there, that you don't see when it's just your typical inline form. I mean, the way they handle layoffs and such. I mean, it's really cool and interesting perspective. We had another question about some of the other data. And Matt, you and I both at times have used HTR, just for an example, as a program that helps us out. What do you think about the utility of using those speed figures as opposed, that's another level of obscure from Thorograph. Do you find any extra juice, any extra help in looking at those kind of numbers?
Yes, certainly. HTR it's a product that Ken Moss puts out, and it's basically just it's a computer. It crunches data and spits out numbers, and it's not sort of your traditional speed figures, although there are speed figure ratings in there, but it's more a sort of Sarton methodology, feet per second analysis of how fast certain horses have run. Now, I don't know. It takes a different sort of calibration of your brain to look at that and go back and forth between those numbers and your traditional speed figure. But I will say the thing I think that's most valuable about a program like an HTR. I know some folks have used a program called Black Magic in the past. There are many of these sort of pieces, these data crunchers out there, these number crunchers. I think they can tip you off to, let's say, a greater than usual number of big prices that otherwise I wouldn't give the time of day. And what that is or why that is, the algorithms or whatever it may be that they use, I don't know. But I found great success with horses that seem rather hopeless based on buyers or time form, that for whatever reason, a program like this does a good job of identifying. So if you're looking for big prices, I think something like an HTR, or I even think about Equinedge with Scotty McKeever. I mean, I think it's a great product that goes ahead and assesses, just because this horse is the most likely winner doesn't mean that these other horses can't run. I like that he gives sort of an assigned probability of how likely a horse is to win any given day.
Our partners over at Race Lens do something similar.
Yep.
There's a lot of elements to that product. I'll shout that one out. But, you don't want too much information. I mean, some people can parse through a lot of information and handle it properly. But I would say just like play around and see what visually or otherwise, meets your brain in the right way and do that. But I think it does make a whole lot of sense these days, unless you're making your own figures, to consult a number of different sources of information to try to give you more confidence about the strength of the various numbers. Interesting one, very much along the same lines. When comparing time form ratings to buyers, does it matter the quality of the track the international horse is coming from? I know I'm not supposed to do this, but with buyers, I'm pretty sure that a 90 at Santa Anita is better than a 90 at Canterbury when the horses turn up against each other, or at least that's the way I handicap it, except for Slammed, of course, says Mike A. Really interesting question. I'll just, everybody knows how much I like Timeform US. They don't even pay us, and I talk about them all the time. So I love them. But I don't think they do a good job when they try to put the international runners on an apples to apples scale with the domestic horses. And Craig Mikowski or Simon Rowlands or Mark Attenberg, they might want to fight me on this, but I'm just telling you, they don't. When you look at the work we have from Stephen Bonnick and Rob Dove, one of the top 10 pro punters in the UK today, and they make an assessment of what they think an international horse is going to run, it's just way freaking better than what you're going to get from Timeform US, a product I love. You're going to need to subscribe to In the Money Plus if you want to get that information, by the way, inthemoneypodcast.com/plus. But I don't even really look at it, honestly. It purports to be on an apples to apples scale. I think the sheets, specifically Thorograph, do a better job trying to get the shippers and our horses on an apples to apples scale. But it's an interesting question raised about, I think that's an interesting idea. A 90 buyer at Santa Anita worth a 90 buyer versus a 90 buyer at Canterbury Park. I mean, obviously, in theory, they're absolutely supposed to compare. But I take the idea that, different people make the figures on different scale, on the different circuits. And maybe that is something you can pay attention to. What do you think about that idea, Matt?
Well, we'll start with the European angle. I tend to agree. I think there's a pretty pretty healthy discrepancy between the European time form ratings and what the time form US figs would suggest. Why that is, I don't know. That's above my pay grade, and for somebody else to figure out. So there is I don't want to call it guesswork, but again, to your point, whether it's Thorograph, again, inside of HTR, there are other figs that are available to try to kind of compare and contrast. There are other ways to try to get an assessment of form lines without necessarily having to go through and look at each runner and see how they came out of a race and what they did next out. Although I would strongly encourage you to do that. But as far as the domestic sort of idea with the buyers are concerned, to your point, a 90 is supposed to be a 90, whether it's at Santa Anita, whether it's at Laurel, whether it's at Gulf, wherever it may be. I think to me, the bigger difference is how is the 90 achieved? It's not so much the track itself. It's a 90 against really, really weak company when you're out on the front end. It's different than a 90 where you're being hounded from jump by, graded stakes caliber runners. So, that 90 horse coming out of a graded stake may not look all that great or looks comparable anyway to the 90 coming from, I'm making it up, a 50 claimer. But I'm going to inherently give that 90 coming out of the graded stake that probably did a little bit more work against better horses, a bit of an upgrade over that other 90 who has been taking on lesser company.
A lot of it comes down to race shape too, right? A horse attending the pace in a race that's fast to get back into some Sarton type concepts. When a race is fast early and fast late, in other words, it's above average pace and it ends up above the par. The figure earned in a fast race is worth a lot more than a front runner in a slow fast race. And, we're getting fairly sophisticated here, but this is a sophisticated audience. And I think that's something you have to consider that plays into exactly what Matt is talking about. We have Ron chiming in. He's got long shots he's interested in. Oxymore in the juvenile turf sprint and Dreamloper in the mile. Just wants our comments specifically on these two runners. Matt, we'll start with you, giving you a chance to give your thoughts on Oxymore in the juvenile turf sprint. You have any interest in this runner?
I'm not going to be using the horse, but I think this is a bit of a scramble race, especially with the pace signed on. And I think Oxymore's run well in all three of his starts. I like the turn back, but to be fair, I thought the horse ran really well in the now, considering the pace situation, up close to a hot pace that more or less came apart, and he was still boxing on at the end. If this 5.5 turn back isn't too sharp, I don't think it will be. And also with that pace that we project to kind of be signed on, I think he's in with a big chance. I don't want to say I'm going to defer to you on Dreamloper. We talked about it earlier today when we were taping some previews for these races, and Nick made a couple of comments about the horse. He seemed to think it was more, I'm concerned about, the horses run well on firm, but this is a different firm, I think, than what firm over there would be considered. And it's also worth noting the horse's best races have come at Longchamp. And I just don't, I don't know, at a shorter number, keep in mind 6-1 on the line. We're not talking about any great shakes here. It's such a deep race. I'm going to be against Dreamloper in this spot.
I'm anti-Dreamloper as well. Subpar runs both times left-handed. I mean, that's a big part of it as well. And then, in the Dove, again, you can get all this information behind the paywall that in the Money Plus. But when you look at the figures Dreamloper's been running, there's a huge discrepancy between the speed figures and the form figures. Now, there's a reason for that sometimes, but there's enough of a discrepancy where at 6-1, you can have Dreamloper. Oxymore, I think, is interesting in a very, very tricky race. Probably like a C type to me. But this is a day, unlike almost any other day in American racing, where I'm happy to use C type horses, because I'm going to be spreadier because you only have to hit like one thing on a weekend necessarily to be in front. And I just feel like you're right. I mean, Oxymore suited by the cutback, just not that much slower than some of these on numbers. So yeah, I'm with Oxymore. I'm pretty anti Dreamloper. It's not like Dreamloper can't win, but I'm just not. I just think it's a bit of a tricky assignment. We had a question from Mark about the fair price on Silver Knot. And here's a really tough one that's going to require us to do math, Matt. What's a fair return on the daily double for Cave Rock and Silver Knot? I'll just jump in right away and say I don't think there can possibly be value on the double because I'm pretty sure Jonathan is going to bet 15,000 to win. So, and Silver Knot, the vibes in the Appleby yard and the vibes in the international markets. I mean, this horse is 5-4 overseas, and I don't think our own Nick Tamaro was like wrong to go 3-1. If he and I had sat there and really talked about it, I think I might have advocated for 2-1, 5-2. But they love this horse. He's going to get his ground. I mean, what's a fair price on him? I mean, if you gave me 2-1, I'd be about it. What do you think about Silver Knot specifically?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm going through, and maybe this is part of the problem. I'm looking at it from what I would perceive as fair value.
That's not a
I
problem.
couldn't. No, but I'm sure some folks are probably a little bit more bullish on this double than I am. I mean, I don't think I would want anything less than 3-1, but probably closer to 7-2. And I know that's a pipe dream. That's not going to happen.
Right.
To me, it has more to do with I've maybe to a fault. I'm starting to just buy into the Charlie Appleby thing, where anything he sends over runs. Well, like I feel like I'm just bashing my head against the wall every time they go out there, because not only do they win by like 5. So
they move up. They're like the most likely winner on paper. They're supposed to win by half a length, and then they win by 2.
So, I mean, I guess if you just wanted to really, I don't know, make them both even money, even though I know that's not, how they're going to go. But to be fair, maybe that's actually a fair representation. Cave Rock might be 3-5. Silver Knot might be 9-5 or 2-1, somewhere thereabouts. I mean, you're looking at roughly 3-1. I mean, I don't know that I would want anything less than that as far as a return is concerned.
When evaluating European shippers, Mark wants to know, do you downgrade horses that have only run on straights and right-handed or have not run well on left-handed tracks in the past? Absolutely. I just did it with Dreamloper. I think it's a thing, to be able to handle going left-handed. And I think a lot of Euros that we've been able to beat at short prices over the years have not had that left-handed form. Give me horses that have run well around Leopardstown. Give me horses that have run well around York. Really give me horses that have run well around Chester, and I really upgrade their chances in the Breeders' Cup. I mean, it's so basic, but I don't think that the market really pays enough attention to it. And it's not, by the way, especially like a juvenile where they've, if they've never tried it, I'm going to go deeper and look at other things. But if they've done it and failed, like Dreamloper, I don't like that.
The runners that have yet to try it, I'm not inclined to downgrade. I'm going to just kind of look at it and say, well, until they prove to me that they can't do it, I'll assume that they can. Those who have tried left-handed turns and have not run as well as they have either on a straight or a right-handed bend, I am 100% with you. I would downgrade them.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's only logical. Jesse asks, if Golden Pal and Highfield Princess engage and the race is too short for Casa Creed, who comes and runs them down late? Interesting question there. I think Highfield Princess will probably, take more of a stalk and pounce approach. But I mean, I think there's some interesting angles in this question. What do you think?
Well, I guess I wanted to try to find someone to beat Golden Pal with, but the more and more I looked at it, it just seems like he's going to have that sort of classic 3-length lead as they go into the far turn. And at that point, if he's cruising along and everybody else is off the bridle, I just don't know if anybody will be able to run him down. I tend to agree with you about Highfield Princess, that I think they're probably not going to be, in some sort of a all-out war early on. I think they're probably going to sit and hopefully they're within a length or two at the top of the lane and maybe they can run him down. If for some reason this thing ends up heating up far more than I think it will, and there's probably needs to be sort of a caveat with that, heating up more than I think it will, meaning he takes pressure. He's going to be going fast no matter what. We know that. I don't know. I threw out a horse earlier, and I'm curious your thoughts. His form recently is so bad, and Nick brought it up earlier. He said, you got to forgive that run at Ascot last month. I mean, Naval Crown, earlier in this year, granted, maybe it was against, inferior, he ran really, really solid races, and he's 30-1 on the line. The problem is, even if you don't like that most recent run, you're going to give him the benefit of the doubt over the soft going. I mean, his run prior to that was terrible. So I don't know where he's at. The fact that he's here, I think, is interesting. But if you needed an absolute just shocker, I don't know. Maybe it is a Naval Crown kind.
I've got Naval Crown in there as sort of a C type. We'll bring in Dove again in this spot. I won't give the moniker the third time, but he put forth the idea that they might actually try to use him a little bit to help Creative Force, who I think, on form and figures is the more likely one. So maybe the answer to the question for me really is Creative Force. I wouldn't leave Naval Crown out because of the points that you make. And the fact that it's just going to be an absolutely incredible price in this spot. Another horse that I originally had as an A is my top pick in the race. I have to mention because I think Going Too Fast will bring her stamina into play. That's Campanelle in this spot. I think she's kind of interesting. And then I think the third horse to mention is Emiratiana, who I think Nick. I mean, this was not a horse that was on my radar. Dove had said to me, we'd kind of dismissed her, and he had said to me, "There's another way to read his form, where he's coming back into a good race," and that was Nick Luck's view completely. So I think those are really the three interesting ideas and horses to have as backups in that scenario. I'm just like, for this race for me, Matt, it's one of these things where I've just been wrong about Golden Pal so often that I'm going to do something hedgy and unlikely to produce equity in this race where I'm going to use and yet also it's going to be a defensive use on a favorite who can win. But I do think technically if God came down to earth and told you the right approach in this race, I think it's probably to try to beat Golden Pal again, but I'm not brave enough to do it.
Yeah, and if I had better vibes or better feels for turf sprints, I mean, I'm interested in the juvenile turf sprint tomorrow, but in this race, I can almost assure you, I won't have any money in it from the BCBC standpoint, just because I'm not very good at these, but also B, Golden Pal isn't it one of those things that I'm almost trying to conjure up ideas and reasons for this horse to lose when all he's ever done is just gone out to the front. He's never lost in the United States. And I get it. He may not be what he was last year, but aside from Highfield Princess, does he need to be? Can he take a slight step back and still be better than everybody else? That's kind of my opinion. The only other thing I'll add, and this isn't rocket science. If this race was at 6 furlongs, I would give Casa Creed a real chance. I'm afraid that this is just a hair too sharp for him. If the turf sprint was run at 6 or 7 furlongs, or knock wood, he stays in training, and next year going down the hill at Santa Anita, 6.5 furlongs. I mean, I feel like that hits him right between the eyes.
Yeah, you'd love him in that spot. Interesting question from Scott. I concede Life is Good will likely send and try to make the lead, as he has in almost every race. Is Todd not savvy enough to know he must switch tactics to have any shot at black type, or is it just impossible to rate that speed? Scott, due respect, I think you're looking at the world wrong. He's in this race to win.
Yeah.
If they just want to, he don't need no more black type. He's not worth anything more. He's here to not only get a Breeders' Cup win, but even with a good second, he proves that he can get the 1.25 miles. It'll help in marketing this horse as a stallion. And his best chance of doing that, certainly his best chance of winning, is to gun. Hope that Flightline breaks slow, breaks slower than usual, and just has some sort of shockingly bad result. Look at this race again with no Flightline in it. Life is Good looks real good. So if for some reason he doesn't turn up on the day, that is Life is Good's best chance of winning. It's not his best chance of running second. I don't think they give a, rat's ass about finishing second. I think they're in it to win it. He's done enough. He's got his stallion deal. They'll be absolutely fine if he runs last. And funny enough, the tactics that make Life is Good most likely to win this race also make him likely to run out of the money. But I don't think they care. I think it's a calculated gamble, and that's what's going on here with Life is Good in the Breeders' Cup Classic. And rather than saying, is Todd not savvy enough, I think he is savvy enough to know that the economics of the situation dictate the win or run out tactics. Your thoughts, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, if the connections were looking at it from, well, how do we maximize our chances to cash the biggest check? I think you would run in the dirt mile again.
That's right.
Instead, they choose to come here. I think the only way he can win is by going. Now, the interesting thing to me is, depending on what you look at from a fig standpoint, this horse is extremely fast. Don't get me wrong. But if you just want to go through, if you really start to nitpick a little bit, he's never been headed which is all well and good. But I mean, there's a scenario in which, and I don't know that they're going to do this, but there's a scenario in which Flightline is just faster. And no one's really discussed that too much. I think we all just think automatically, well, Life is Good's drawn to the inside. He's going to break. Flightline just, right off of his flank, goes up, takes him when he wants, and goes on. Well, we've seen time and time again that horses, when they run their fastest, they do it when they're on the lead. They don't do it necessarily when they're sitting off of a target. You think of some of these bigger names that we've seen over the past handful of years. I immediately think of American Pharoah. He was at his best in the Belmont. He was at his best in the Breeders' Cup Classic when he's by himself on the front end, just winging it. I don't know. I mean, Flightline, it was one of those things that according to Timeform US, he ran what you would call, and I've stolen the line from you. He ran an upline, where he ran faster as the race went on, and Flavien Prat did everything he could to hold them back early on. I don't know. I mean, there's a part of me that wonders if you think you're on the best horse, don't get cute. And by the way, if Life is Good's only chance of winning the race is to go to the front, take it away from him. It's the same concept as Life is Good and Knicks Go from the Pegasus back in January. The way to beat Knicks Go was to put the race to him, take it to him, beat him to the front. He's never passed anyone. He's never shown that he can. I wonder if it's, in a weird way, the same scenario here with this horse. I wouldn't be shocked. I don't know if it'll happen. I wouldn't be shocked if Flightline just goes right to the front.
I wouldn't be shocked either if he breaks for once, and if he's as much better now as his morning work suggests that he might be. I don't think that's crazy at all. But I also just think he's gonna I think the most likely scenario is he just lets Life is Good give him the lead into the race, kind of like what happened in the Pacific Classic. But what you're saying wouldn't shock me at all. Had a question about the Buick rider booking on G. Laurie. I'm going to throw this out there. It's baseless speculation. Somebody told me that they thought G. Laurie might be scratching. Hopefully not right. I love these Oscar performances. You hadn't seen anything about that, had you?
Well, no, but it would throw a major monkey wrench into my game plan on Friday.
Oh boy. Well, let's hope it's racetrack BS. I love the Buick booking, and I can name drop. I'll pull my own inner JK and name drop here. When I was talking to Graham Motion at Royal Ascot about his decision to use Buick on Spenderella instead of an American rider, he just said, and obviously he was talking about Ascot specifically, that he felt like Buick gave him an edge. But it was obvious from the way he talked about him that he just, one of his top riders in the world. And if he's not going to be able to get, if he's not going to be able to get to one of his USA go-to riders, it was just very obvious to me he'd be very excited about Buick. And, for me, Buick is a guy I've been, talking about and praising and loving since Debussy in the Arlington Million way back in the day. I mean, I just think he's one of the great riders in the world. And it's a great jockey booking that absolutely increases my confidence. And I hope that rumor I heard was just a rumor.
How confident are we in Herringswell Stables, which is the official page of Graham Motion's Herringswell Stables?
We're pretty darn confident.
2 hours ago, G. Laurie will scratch from the juvenile filly's turf after spiking a temperature this afternoon. We are extremely disappointed for our stable and her connections. This photo was taken by Scott Serio of Eclipse Sports this morning when we thought all systems were go. The dream lives on, and Matticat Stables has been tagged in the photo. So, I think that's pretty solid, which is devastating news for me because I can tell you now what my game plan was. I was texting with you earlier in the week saying, what do you think the best way for me to attack this was, because she was going to be my real play for the day. I wasn't going to go crazy because I think the juvenile filly's turf is a bit of a scramble anyway. But I was going to play 1,000 to win on her, hopefully in that 10 or 12 to 1 range. Or did I kind of go and shoot for the moon and play a bunch of exotics and hope for chaos? Now I have to, when we're done with this, it's another coffee. It's back to the drawing board.
If you need to take a break and have me filibuster, well,
no
coffee going. More reasons why we've got to bring this. We got to bring this boat back into shore in the next 25 minutes. Interesting question from Leo. In the mile, Kinross is very popular despite never having won in a mile. First time in North America, outside draw. Does it make sense to toss him? I'll be honest, I think it does. I mean, he's such a cool horse, dual Group 1 winner. He's so cool. Normally, you get 6 furlongs straight on a testing course like Ascot, you're going to get a mile in the USA. But For me, the thing about Kinross is mostly the ground.
Yes.
Now, there could be some showers, but this is a horse that I think clearly moves up with cut in the ground. It's a tricky draw. It's a tough race. For me, it goes well beyond Kinross in modern games. I think we've got USA horses in here that make sense, especially Annapolis, who I picked on top. And I've also talked about Smooth Like Straight as my long shot play. Now, granted, Smooth Like Straight for me, it's all about the prices. At Nick Tamaro's 10 of the morning line, just the price. At the 33-1 he was available last week in the UK, sign me up. But Kinross doesn't do it for me in this spot. He's good enough to win. I'd certainly have him as a backup in exotics, but yeah, I mean, he's again, I say this, it's what I do and what I say are sometimes different because, I can be on a day like this where I don't, there's enough equity that I feel like it's okay to use defensive backups without costing yourself. But I mean, defensive use Kinross for me. I think you're supposed to bet against him. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it is predominantly the ground. I mean, he just seems like, and also to be fair, he's run over good to firm going. But it seems like his game goes to another level when there's cut in the ground. And even if those showers do show up, I'm not expecting it to all of a sudden be, a bog out there. Right? I think if anything, it just softens it up a little bit. He is certainly capable of winning a race like this. But the combination of the depth of the field, the outside draw, and him possibly not getting the footing that he truly loves and relishes, to me, that's enough to try to beat him at a short number.
I apologize to all the folks in the comments whose questions we're not going to get to, but I will point out that, one of the reasons we do this show is to be a shout out to our In the Money Plus people. And those are the people whose questions we're prioritizing. Should we get through everything? We'll get to some of those, but the best way to make sure you get your questions answered for the next Q&A show we do, which will probably be around the Derby next year, sign up for In the Money Plus, inthemoneypodcast.com/plus. Very, I'll tell you, I'm very gratified, Matt. I went to the BCBC little cocktail party before this. And, like I said before, a lot of people were like, oh, go do those shows. We need to listen in the morning. But a lot of people also credited, all our work, but especially Plus, because that gives you the chance, even when you miss a show, to be able to get there and, see all the picks and get stuff going on. And we also have on the Plus side, extra articles and podcasts, things like the wagering strategy piece that Tyler Wisman, our editor over there, is going to be doing, suggesting strategies for $250 bankrolls, $500 bankrolls, and $1,000 bankrolls. And that segues neatly into these bankroll management questions that we have. And we'll start with one from Matthew. How would you advise allocating bankroll for someone that is confident in their work and opinions in the dirt races, but not at all in the turf races? The Euro contingent makes being confident in those races seemingly impossible, to me at least. Really good question. And I think the answer that comes to mind for me, Matt, is play those dirt races vertically. Because while you have if you're a turf lover, it's a little bit of a prejudice, right? If you're a turf lover, you've got the all turf pick on Friday and the all turf pick on Saturday. Granted, one thing a dirt lover could do would be to look to those 2-day daily doubles connecting dirt races on Friday and Saturday. And there's 2 of those, but otherwise you're not going to have a whole lot of opportunities to string together multiple dirt opinions. I mean, there's a lot of, every other race, dirt and turf other than that. What are your thoughts on this question?
Well, you were kind of the one that had tipped it off many moons ago, but the idea of sort of creating your own double, it's effectively a parlay. I mean, if you go ahead and play a horse to win, I'm making it up. Let's say it's Saturday and it's the dirt mile. You like a horse, that's race number 5. And let's say you love Jackie's Warrior. And unfortunately, they're not hooked up. They're not actually connected. There's nothing stopping you from, let's just say your allotment for that race is $50. Bet your $50 on whichever horse you like in that dirt mile. And if you win, roll it all into Jackie's Warrior, roll it all into, an exacta of him on top of somebody else. You can kind of create a little bit. Maybe it's not you're not going to officially know what your payoff could be until you see what the tote odds are and all that kind of stuff. But you can artificially make your own little double or pick 3 if you're really someone who's only into the dirt races.
That's an excellent idea. Breeders' Cup Day especially. I mean, the reason, the sort of knee-jerk reason not to do that is you're paying the takeout extra times when you do that, as opposed to in one race. But there's enough meat on the bone, as we like to say, in the Breeders' Cup that I think that's a strategy I've talked to Jonathan about, knowing how the way that he plays in these races. Like, you don't, if the double isn't there, you can kind of make your own double in the exact way that Matt was just talking about.
But to
Dean
your point,
asks,
I think there are people, not to interrupt, that would
oh, go
be,
ahead.
but that would be way averse to that and think that that's a crazy thing for that very reason, that you're paying the takeout twice. And I can't argue that. But if you're telling me that you're only comfortable doing one thing, or and I don't mean that in a demeaning way, then I mean I don't really know what else to tell you. That's a way to really take advantage of your opinions. You're going to probably pay a little bit of a premium, but it's better than the alternative, isn't it?
I would think so. Dean has a question about betting multi-race versus individual races and wants to know what we would advise in terms of percentage of bankroll. He says he probably spends about 60% on multi-race sequences and wonders if this is out of line. It a little bit depends on what kind of player you are and what your goals are, don't you think, Matt?
100%. I mean, you have to acknowledge what your strengths and weaknesses are. If you're someone who really enjoys, or you think you're good at putting together multi-race sequences, what's wrong with allotting the majority of your bankroll of that? And maybe you just pick one or two other instances where you play a horse to win, or you play some kind of cold punch exacta. If you're someone who your strength is exotics, and you like to play exactas and tries, and look, supers on Fridays and Saturdays of Breeders' Cups are not easy to hit, but guess what? The reward is going to be enormous if you're right. So, and then you have the old-fashioned folks like me that, what, I like to bet to win. I like doubles. I like kind of smaller, I don't want to call them easier to hit because they're not easy, but, I need less things to happen.
They're easier. They're indubitably easier.
Yeah, I just think you have to be honest with yourself about what your strengths and weaknesses are. I mentioned the turf sprint. I'm going to have minimal money in there, if any at all, because it's not my forte. I don't do all that well with them historically. So why would I devote, a fair bit of my bankroll for, I mean, let's call it 14 races. I'm not including the undercard races. Why would I commit anything substantially to a race that I know in my heart of hearts I'm not all that good with?
That makes a lot of sense. And for me, it's really about your goals. And for the way that I play, my ratio when it comes to this question would be like 80% in straight pools and maybe 20% just trying to hit it out of the park. And that just suits my personality. I can't say, oh no, you're wrong to put 60% in multi-race bets. I mean, if you're just somebody who don't really, the emotional, don't care about the emotional value of winning on the day. I mean, I probably place too much of a premium on the emotional value of winning on a day. It feels good to me to walk out of the Breeders' Cup up 1,000,
Yeah.
But like in EV terms, you could argue, that what's 1,000, and if you'd taken your more aggressive stand, you could have won 10 times that. And from an EV point of view, maybe that's the way you want to approach it. It depends. It really, I mean, I hate to say it, the answer to so many of these questions is it depends.
No, but I mean, I think of it from the BCBC standpoint, right? The idea of, let's say I got the bankroll to, I'm making it up, $20,000. To your point, from an EV standpoint, let's say you go all in with that 20 and it can get you up to 65 or 70,000. Maybe that's not enough to win, but you run inside the top, I don't know, top 10, top 15 of the contest. You get prize money on top of it. I'm sure the EV folks would look at it and say, how often do you have an opportunity to turn 20 into, I'm making it up, 120 or 130 or somewhere thereabouts. But then there's the part of me that says, if I go home to my wife and my kid with 20 grand in my pocket, I'm going to be the hero of the day. So there's real life that comes into it too. And maybe call that a little bit on the softer side, but I think everyone has different sort of goals. You said it perfectly.
9 questions left, 15 minutes. So I think we're going to call this speed round. How much do you use historical trends when handicapping the Breeders' Cup? For example, great records for Americans in the juvenile filly turf, for Euros in the juvenile turf, early speed in the juvenile turf sprint. I'll be honest, I don't really worry about it. I think it's small sample size theater. I think you've got to look at each race individually. Do any of those things affect the way that you look at the world map?
No, I agree with you. I mean, small sample size, especially when you're talking about it based on the racetrack or the venue. I mean, it's only the third time we've had a Breeders' Cup here at Keeneland. I've gone through. I think track profiles still play and are applicable day to day, but that's no different than any other day that you play in the horses. But strictly Breeders' Cup results, no, I don't. I wouldn't go too deep down that rabbit hole.
Carl wants to hear us talk about track trends over the recent meet, especially with the idea that the turf might be firmer or faster than the average course this time of year. It's been a dry period, and what do we think about this turf course? Oh, it's such a tough question. When you look at historical data, Keeneland turf, you don't really want to be, and this is true for sprints and routes. You don't really want to be 1, 2, 3, honestly. Like, you see dead rails here. You don't really want to be 10, 11, 12, but it's, again, not enough that it would, if I had two that I rated equally, I'd go with the one in the middle over the one down on the inside of the one on the outside. But it's not enough to make me, change the way that I look at things generally. And it can change. I mean, we got to watch, after a week with not much rain, it rained Sunday, but it hasn't rained since. Speed could be good on the turf. Like, this is one of these, you have to pay attention. I can't tell you how this turf course is going to play. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, and I mean, the only other thing I would add to that is it's probably more pertinent to know how things have gone earlier in the card, day of kind of thing, as opposed to the historical trend. Because to your point, as much as I think you can take something from that most recent meet that we've had, now we're going to be going on basically a full week since there's been any racing here. And we know how quickly tracks can change from day to day, whether it's maintenance, whether it's weather, whether it's you name it. So I put it this way. I'm always reluctant and leery to sit here and tear up all my handicapping because of one result. I would say stick to your guns and wait until you are more confident than not that something is a little bit different, or maybe you need to be in a certain position. I wouldn't just totally, try to rewrite everything that you've gone and done just based on a couple of results or what a trend would suggest it should be compared to what it is today.
I might sound like a broken record answering this next question. How bad are outside posts at Keeneland on turf and dirt? Kim has seen other handicappers tossing horses solely based on post position. Tossing a horse based on post position is a mistake. Full stop. Changing the odds you need to bet a horse based on post position, it is only logical. The outside posts aren't good, particularly on either surface, from the numbers that Matt Vagvolgi shared with us at the beginning of the meet. But it's very horse to horse. Golden Pal in the juvenile turf sprint a couple of years ago was in the parking lot, and it was obvious to the world that he had the speed to clear. And I don't think it really changed his price at all. I think back at 2015 Breeders' Cup, hit it a bomb, looked like a 3-1 shot, maybe a 7-2 shot on paper. He goes off at 7-1 in the 14, and it's just one of these things. Like, it requires, people just want us to give winners. It's not the way the game works, right? Like, hit it the bomb from there in 2015 would have been a bad bet at 7-2, and you would have got lucky if he won. And that he was 7-1. It was a great play that I was happy to make. I mean, it's not about toss or use. It's about what price should the horse be. And it's about every individual situation. I think the most interesting runner to, throw out there in this context is the Platinum Queen. And, I see her tonight opening on Betfair at 9-2. And, the hate has gone too far about the 12 post. I hate the 12 post for her. But I mean, this is a 2-1, 5-2 shot. You want to give me 9-2? I'll roll the dice out in the 12. What do you think?
Yeah, and another one that is potentially compromised, but I don't know that it. To your point, I think it's a lot of case by case. So domestic spending. Okay, now look, he's got other things to overcome anyway, but he's breaking toward the outside. So much of it for me is a running style standpoint. If this is a horse that wants to be forward, there's other speed to his inside, and he's going to just absolutely, there's no chance of him not being hung 4 or 5 wide. Well, that's not great. If you've got a horse that you're probably just going to take back anyway and try to slot over, maybe he's still a little bit wide, but he's not going to be hung out in the parking lot. I don't know. I mean, to me, it's not as substantial a sort of detriment for a horse that you're going to just try to take back and slot over, as opposed to one that has to be prominent throughout. And to your point, it's always a matter of, is the horse a fair price or not? If you're getting an overlay, And you know what? Just demand a few extra points if you're really kind of unsure about things. Jagera is a prime example of this. If that horse was drawn better, she's probably 2 or 3 points less than what she'll be tomorrow afternoon. Purely on talent, she's among the most likely winners. If people totally jump ship because she's drawn out in 13, I guess now she's going to slot over 1. I think I could see myself calling that audible, saying, all right, well, I had $1,000 we're going to bet. Now, all of a sudden, is she the one that takes it at 8 or 9 to 1 as opposed to G. Lori at 12? I think it's a case by case kind of thing.
Another question that I'm going to probably answer fairly quickly. One of the most significant track biases or trends for Keeneland that demand consideration based on surface, distance, or post position. This is it depends. I mean, I'll give the generally speaking, when you're dealing with turf on sprints or routes, you want to be in that middle area. On dirt, it feels like weirdly on sprints, you still like the inside still statistically doesn't give you much sway, and the outside is a little bit tricky. Once again, you basically want to be in the middle, just statistically. In the routes, though, the dirt routes, the inside does tend to be better, which is so weird to me. It doesn't make sense. But I mean, I don't think you can draw too many conclusions from this. I think you have to pay attention. You have to look for horses that are outrunning or underrunning their odds. I mean, in the Breeders' Cup, honestly, the right thing to do, and I'm not going to do it. I don't have the bandwidth. I don't have the time. Do these undercard races thoroughly and have a full sense of what's supposed to happen, and then use the results on the track. But I'll tell you what, if you want to be lazy like me, I'm just going to use the odds as a proxy for that. And horses, if short horses are getting either super inside or super outside trips and underperforming or overperforming, I'm just going to use that and try to help me as a guide. And then when you get into the races that I've actually handicapped and then the 100%, in this case, the 120% job on, I'll be pretty quick to maybe, tilt one direction or another. But, as Mike Maloney once said, if you want to play the track bias game, if you want to dance with that game, you better be on your toes.
I was going to say, I mean, it is such a slippery slope. And yeah, you could end up being correct in smashing things out of the park, or you go broke overnight. In the blink of an eye, I should say. I mean, it's part of the reason that I'm as reluctant to dive into a bias until it is abundantly clear. And at that point, the edge is gone. But especially on a day like Friday or Saturday, I don't want this has been a buildup of 6 months. These horses inside and out. You know what they do and they don't do, where they like to be, where they don't like to be. I don't want to just all of a sudden throw it up in the air and say, oh, well, in the opener, a horse wired at 4 to 1. Well, maybe speed is good. Well, guess what? 4 to 1 shots win a lot. I just don't want to. I am so averse to that idea or that train of thought. Stick to your guns unless something is really sticking out to you, then make a little bit of an audible, but otherwise roll with what you got.
John had a question about the wind. Wind is really hard to evaluate on American turf courses. Super important on a straight course in the UK, where the tailwind will help the front runners and the headwind will help the closers. Here it's really, really hard. I mean, again, I think knowing it's meant to be windy would make me pay attention to try to do what Matt was just saying and, maybe make some evaluation based on bias. It would make me more inclined to believe a biased narrative if there's something unusual happening, but it's because they run one way and then the other way. It's not, I can give you some theories about it, but I've never seen any data on it. And I think it's, again, a bit of a slippery slope. Any thoughts on wind?
No, I mean, if I were to add anything, I would just be, throwing things into the wind, no pun intended, seeing which way so I don't have a real strong opinion there or any kind of data to back it up.
Okay, John, I'm very interested in the BC Dirt Mile, as many of the favorites have achieved their best speed figures at one turn. Going to probably key plays around horses like Laurel River and Simplification, who've shown the agility, ability to move on the turns. Doesn't play Keeneland often. Is that something consistent with track profile? Is he overblowing the one turn versus two turn element? I don't really think so. I mean, I get that idea. The only thing I'll say is that typically I think the misconception is that people sometimes think, oh, he got a mile, but around one turn, can he get it around two turns? I'd be more concerned about it in the other direction. I mean, running around the turn means you can go slower. The one turn mile is more stamina testing than the 2 turn mile. But at the same time, there are certain horses that just they're handier and they can go faster when they're turning. So if you know a horse can do that, that's a huge positive. So, I mean, there's some signal. There's something interesting in exploring this issue further, but it's not there's no easy, this is good, this is bad as far as the 1 turn versus 2 turn thing goes. But I mean, obviously, I think that, if they're proven around 2 turns, I mean, I think that's a positive, but the 1 turn thing, it's not necessarily disqualifying.
I think there is a pretty substantial difference between a 1 turn and a 2 turn kind of mile or 7/8 of a mile kind of situation, just simply because, you brought it up a little bit, but there are certain horses that are much better at running the turns than others. And I agree with you that a 1 turn mile is more of a stamina test, but you've only got 1 bend to deal with compared to 2. And some of these horses that do get around the bends, I mean, I always would joke when I was still working at the Forum that if the Breeders' Cup Classic were ever run at Charlestown, Imperative would have won the race like 3 times because he just scooted around the bends better than anyone else. It didn't matter if he was inside, outside, whatever. The horse he could get around those tight bends better than anyone else could. You put him at a 1 turn mile, I don't think he's nearly the same animal. So I do think there is a major difference. I like to see the horses that have done it around 2 turns compared to the 1. So Cody's Wish in a spot like this, he's run well around 2 turns. He's only tried it once, I believe. But I don't know that he's quite as good around 2 as he is around 1. Conversely, I think there's a scenario that Laurel River is as good, if not better, around 2 than he is around 1. He's where I'm going to go in this spot. And predominantly for that reason, also from a speed standpoint, I don't think he's going to be left in the dust. I think he's going to be pretty close, and I think he should have every opportunity if he's good enough.
3 questions, 3 minutes. Most likely international winner over the 2 days. Just by percentages, I think it's Silver Knot. Any thoughts, Matt?
International winner percentage. Oh, man. I guess I'm going to go. You know what? I'll go with Highfield Princess, even though I think Golden Pal is going to win.
You're not that big of a Silver Knot fan, clearly.
It's not that. It's just I think he's going to be, carry on.
Best long shot Friday, best long shot Saturday. You got I have to look for a second. Do you have this one prepared?
Yeah. So Friday, I'm shooting for the moon, and maybe this is where I'm going to pivot for the BCBC. In the juvenile turf, I am going to bet Reckoning Force, who was the second choice in the Bourbon here locally. He had a miserable trip, missed the break, X, Y, and Z, stuck behind runners. If you believe that form when he was with Joseph O'Brien's barn, now he puts blinkers on for Brendan Walsh. I don't know if he can win, but I think he can hit the board at a massive, massive price. So I think he's in with a big chance as a giant number. And then on Saturday, she's only 12 on the morning line, and you and I have talked about her before. I think she might float a little bit Rougier in the filly and mare turf. I'm not totally sold that she's without a chance in a race like this over a turf course like Keeneland compared to some of the rock hard turf that she encountered in New York.
American Rocket on Friday is a top pick of mine, who I think will be every bit of 20-1. I'm pretty darn chalky looking at my Saturday picks, but I'm just going to go with my gut and a horse that I think could drift over the 6-1 of the morning line and say Mishriff. The idea that Mishriff would be a long shot is a bit of a joke. And if you want to make fun of me in the comments, please do. But hey, we've just got about a minute left, but we do only have one more question. Mike wants to know, I know this is horse racing and there are no guarantees, but do you have 3 horses that would be more than likely to win over the 2 days so he can do an ACCA, which is essentially a parlay, like 3 horses that you don't think will lose, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, and they're obvious, but Cave Rock Friday, Jackie's Warrior Saturday, Flightline Saturday.
I'll go Cave Rock, Silver Knot, and Flightline to wrap it up. We got through the plus questions in an hour. I'm proud of us, Matt. It's been amazing doing these Horse Player Happy Hour shows with you. Early indications are we're going to be back next year. I can't wait. I can't wait to see you over there tomorrow. All your grid picks will be over on the inthemoneypodcast.com/plus site. I just got a chiding email from our editor, Tyler Wisman, saying everyone put their picks in except you. What am I going to do? I thought
hey, man, we're working.
I must have forgot. I'll do it tonight when we're done with the Pro Players Roundtable, which is basically happening now. You can't watch that on YouTube, but we will drop it. We'll put it in the podcast feed. Do us a favor, subscribe to us on YouTube. Rate us, review us, do all that good stuff. And, you got to listen to the pods too, wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, etc., etc. Any closing thought for you, Matt, before we get out of here?
We're finally there. Looking forward to the next couple of days.
It's going to be a ton of fun. For TV's Matt Bernier, for In the Money Media, I'm Peter Thomas Fornatal. May you win all your photos.